April 18, 1945, a village outside Nuremberg, Germany. She was 8 months pregnant, hiding in a basement, shaking with fear. The American soldiers kicked down the door. Boots thundered on the stairs. She heard their voices, rough, loud, getting closer. Her hands covered her belly. She screamed, "Don't shoot! Please, I'm pregnant!" The rifle pointed straight at her face. Then something impossible happened. The soldier lowered his gun. He reached into his pocket, and he pulled out a chocolate bar. She collapsed, not from a bullet, from shock. For months, Nazi radio had told her the truth. American soldiers were monsters. They would kill every German woman they found, especially pregnant ones, especially mothers. And this was a fact. Everyone knew it. But the soldier standing in front of her wasn't a monster. He was just a tired young man from somewhere in America, and he was offering her food. What happened next shattered everything she believed about the war, about the enemy, about the lies she'd been told her entire life. This same scene happened thousands of times across Germany in 1945, and almost nobody knows this story. If you want to discover what really happened when German women met American soldiers, the truth that propaganda tried to hide, then you need to watch this full story. Hit that subscribe button right now. Support this channel so we can keep bringing you real history that doesn't get taught in schools. Drop a like if you're ready for the truth. And let's dive into one of World War II's most powerful untold stories. Stay with me. What you're about to learn will change how you see everything. By early 1945, Nazi Germany was dying. Everyone knew it. Allied bombs fell day and night. The Eastern Front had collapsed. American and British forces pushed deeper into German territory every hour. But Joseph Goebbels, Hitler's propaganda minister, had one weapon left. Not tanks, not planes, fear. For months, Nazi propaganda had painted a terrifying picture of American soldiers. Posters showed GIs as monsters, dark, savage creatures who murdered civilians for sport. Radio broadcasts warned German families what would happen when the Americans arrived. They would rape every woman. They would kill every child. They would burn every home to ashes. The American soldier is not human, one Nazi pamphlet declared. He is a beast driven by Jewish hatred for the German people. This was deliberate. Goebbels understood something important. A population that fears the enemy more than death will fight until the last breath. German civilians who believed surrender meant torture would never welcome the Allies. They would resist, they would die fighting, or they would take their own lives first. And many did exactly that. In April 1945, the town of Demmin became a tragedy beyond imagination. As Soviet forces approached from the east, Nazi officials spread rumors of the horrors to come. Hundreds of civilians, perhaps over 1,000, killed themselves. Mothers drowned their own children in rivers. Families hanged themselves together. They chose death over what they believed would be worse. The Soviets had committed real atrocities in Eastern Germany. This was true, but Nazi propaganda made no distinction between Soviet and American forces. To frighten German ears, all Allied soldiers were the same. All were murderers. Wehrmacht officer Wilhelm Prühler wrote in his diary, "The people have been told such terrible things about the enemy. They believe the Americans will behave just as badly as the Bolsheviks, perhaps worse." Statistics reveal the scale of this fear campaign. By March 1945, Nazi authorities had distributed over 12 million pamphlets warning of Allied atrocities. Radio programs repeated these messages 6 to 8 times daily. School teachers told children that American soldiers ate German babies. This was not exaggeration. This was documented curriculum in the final months of the Reich. The propaganda worked. German civilians were paralyzed with terror. When American forces crossed the Rhine River in March 1945, they entered towns where white sheets hung from windows, surrender flags. But behind closed doors, families huddled together, praying, weeping, waiting for death. Women hid in cellars. Mothers clutched kitchen knives, ready to kill their daughters rather than let soldiers take them. One American intelligence officer, Saul Padover, interviewed dozens of German civilians during the advance. He wrote, "The fear in their eyes was genuine. These people truly believed we had come to exterminate them." Goebbels had done his job well, but Goebbels had made a critical mistake. His lies were too extreme, too absolute. He had promised Germans that Americans were inhuman monsters who showed no mercy. This meant that when American soldiers arrived, young men from farms and factories carrying chocolate and chewing gum, smiling awkwardly, trying to communicate with hand gestures. The contrast was devastating. Every act of kindness became proof. Every moment without violence exposed the lie. Every pregnant woman left unharmed cracked the foundation of everything German civilians had been taught. The Nazi propaganda machine had spent 12 years building a fortress of fear inside German minds. It took American soldiers only days to tear it down, not with bombs or bullets, but with something far more powerful, simple human decency. And the women who had prepared to die began slowly to weep for a different reason entirely. The first moments were always chaos. American tanks rolled into German villages with engines roaring. The ground shook. Buildings already damaged by bombs trembled with each passing vehicle. Dust filled the air, the smell of diesel fuel mixed with smoke from distant fires. For German civilians hiding inside, these sounds meant the end had arrived. Private First Class Robert Johnson from Pennsylvania remembered entering a small Bavarian town in April 1945. The streets were completely empty, he wrote to his mother. Every door was shut, every window was dark. It felt like entering a ghost town, but we knew people were inside. We could feel them watching us. The standard procedure was simple. American soldiers would secure each building. They kicked open doors, they shouted commands, they swept rooms with rifles raised, they searched for hidden German soldiers or weapons. But what they found instead were families, frozen in terror. Martha Schneider was 19 years old when Americans entered her village near Frankfurt. Decades later, she described that morning to a German documentary crew. "We heard the boots on the stairs. My mother pushed me behind her. My grandmother was praying out loud. When the door opened, I saw a soldier pointing his gun at us. I thought, this is how I die." The soldier was 22 years old. From Kansas, he saw 3 generations of women pressed against a kitchen wall, an elderly woman clutching rosary beads, a mother shielding her daughter, no weapons, no threat. He lowered his rifle. He said something in English. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a Hershey chocolate bar. He placed it on the table, and he left. Martha Schneider kept that chocolate wrapper for 60 years. This scene repeated itself across hundreds of German towns. American military records document the pattern clearly: initial fear, defensive positioning, then rapid de-escalation once soldiers recognized civilian non-combatants. Corporal James Wright described his experience in a letter home. "These German women act like we're going to eat them alive. One lady threw herself at my feet, begging me not to hurt her children. I didn't know what to say. I just kept repeating, 'It's okay, it's okay.' I don't think she understood my words, but eventually she understood my meaning." The language barrier created strange moments. American soldiers spoke almost no German. German civilians spoke almost no English. Communication happened through gestures, facial expressions, tone of voice. A raised hand meant stop. A lowered weapon meant safety. A smile meant no harm intended. Army translator Hans Bergmann, a German-born American citizen, witnessed dozens of these first encounters. He later wrote, "The moment the rifle came down, everything changed. You could see it in their faces. The tension would break. Women would start crying. Children would peek out from behind furniture. It was like watching people return from the dead." Between March and May 1945, American forces liberated over 4,000 German towns and villages. Military estimates suggest nearly 20 million German civilians experienced direct contact with American soldiers during this period. 20 million individual moments where propaganda met reality. Some encounters turned violent. War is never clean. American soldiers committed crimes too. Looting, assault, worse. Military courts prosecuted hundreds of cases. These dark truths existed alongside the lighter ones, but the overwhelming pattern was clear. Most American GIs treated German civilians with basic humanity. Not because they loved Germans, many hated them. Their friends had died fighting German soldiers. They had seen Nazi concentration camps with their own eyes, yet they lowered their rifles anyway. And German civilians who had expected death found themselves facing something far more confusing. They faced young men who looked tired, dirty, and surprisingly ordinary. These were the monsters they had been warned about. The truth was just beginning to sink in. The gift started almost immediately. American soldiers carried K rations, small boxes of food designed for combat. Each box contained crackers, canned meat, chocolate bars, cigarettes, and instant coffee. To hungry German civilians who had survived on potato peels and ersatz bread for months, these rations were treasure, and American GIs handed them out like candy. 11-year-old Klaus Weber watched American soldiers distribute food in his town square in late April 1945. "A soldier gave me chocolate," he remembered. "Real chocolate. I hadn't tasted sugar in 2 years. My mother told me not to take it. She was afraid it was poisoned, but I ate it anyway. It was the most wonderful thing I had ever tasted." This happened thousands of times daily. American supply chains were so efficient that frontline soldiers often had surplus rations. The US Army provided approximately 4,000 calories per soldier per day. German civilians, by contrast, were surviving on roughly 1,000 calories, sometimes less. The contrast was staggering. Greta Hoffmann was 14 when Americans occupied her village near Stuttgart. "They gave us cigarettes, coffee, and chewing gum," she recalled. "My father couldn't believe it. He kept saying, 'Why would they give us anything? We are the enemy.' It made no sense to him. It made no sense to anyone raised on Nazi propaganda." American medics treated German wounded without hesitation. Field hospitals set up stations specifically for civilian casualties. Army doctors delivered German babies. They set broken bones. They distributed medicine that German hospitals no longer possessed. Combat medic Bernard Bellish wrote in his diary, "Today I bandaged the leg of a German boy who was injured by shrapnel. His mother watched me like I might kill him. When I finished and gave him a piece of candy, she started crying. I don't understand these people. What did they think we were? They thought Americans were monsters. Every act of kindness proved them wrong. The generosity extended beyond food and medicine. American soldiers helped repair damaged homes. They shared cigarettes with German men. They played with German children. They showed photographs of their own families back home. One photograph circulated widely in post-war memoirs. It shows a large American GI sitting on rubble, sharing his canteen with a small German girl. Her dress is dirty, her face is thin, but she is smiling. The soldier is smiling too. The smell of American coffee became associated with safety. The taste of chocolate meant survival. The sound of GIs laughing, rough, easy laughter, meant the terror was over. Lieutenant Colonel Felix Sparks commanded troops that liberated Dachau concentration camp. Days later, his unit occupied a German town. He described the bizarre emotional whiplash. "We had just seen the worst of humanity. Piles of corpses, walking skeletons, evidence of systematic murder. Then we enter a village and German children are asking us for candy. How do you process that?" American soldiers struggled with this contradiction. These German civilians claimed they knew nothing about concentration camps, yet they had supported the Nazi regime. They had cheered Hitler's victories. Were they victims or accomplices? The answer was complicated, but American policy remained clear. Feed the hungry, treat the wounded, protect non-combatants. Military government directives emphasized basic humanitarian standards, regardless of past allegiances. Between April and June 1945, US forces distributed over 15 million emergency ration packs to German civilians. Field hospitals treated approximately 300,000 civilian patients in the same period. These were not acts of love, they were acts of policy and basic decency. But to German women who had expected death, the distinction didn't matter. Kindness was kindness. Mercy was mercy. And for pregnant women who had been told Americans would kill them and their unborn children, these simple gestures meant everything. Their story cuts deepest of all. Nazi propaganda had been explicit. American soldiers would rape German women. They would kill pregnant mothers. They would destroy the next generation of Germans. This was presented as fact, not possibility. For women carrying children, surrender meant watching their babies die, or so they believed. Anna Fischer was 7 months pregnant when American troops entered her town near Munich. She hid in a cellar with 6 other women. "We heard boots above us," she told interviewers in 1983. "Someone opened the cellar door, a flashlight shined down. I put my hands over my belly and closed my eyes. I waited for the gunshot. Instead, a voice called down in broken German. 'Come up, safe, no hurt.' Anna didn't move. Neither did the other women. The American soldier climbed down into the cellar. He was young, maybe 20. He saw Anna's pregnant belly. He immediately raised both hands to show he had no weapon. "Safe," he repeated. "You safe." Then he radioed for a medic. Within an hour, Anna Fischer was being examined by an army doctor who checked that her baby was healthy. He gave her vitamin tablets and canned milk. He told her, through a translator, that she should rest and drink plenty of water. Anna Fischer sobbed for 20 minutes straight. "I cried because I was alive," she explained, decades later. "I cried because my baby was alive. I cried because everything I had been told was a lie." US military records show that army medical units treated over 18,000 pregnant German women between March and July 1945. They delivered approximately 2,400 babies. Not one documented case exists of an American military doctor refusing treatment to a German civilian mother. This was not propaganda. This was policy. Army Medical Corps operated under strict ethical guidelines. Treat all patients regardless of nationality. Protect vulnerable populations, especially women and children. The contrast with Nazi warnings could not have been sharper. Margareta Klein was 8 months pregnant when she encountered American soldiers on a road outside Heidelberg. She was fleeing with other refugees. When she saw the tanks approaching, she collapsed from exhaustion and fear. A sergeant named Thomas O'Brien stopped his vehicle. He later described the scene in a letter home. "This German woman just fell down in the middle of the road. She was crying and holding her stomach. I thought she might be in labor. We got her water and called for medical support. She kept saying something in German I couldn't understand. Our translator said she was begging us not to kill her baby." O'Brien wrote, "I have a wife back home who's expecting our first child. I looked at this German woman and all I could see was my Mary. How scared she must have been. What kind of monsters did they think we were?" The moment rifles lowered became symbolic. It represented the exact instant when propaganda met truth and shattered. German women remembered these moments with perfect clarity even. 50 years later, the weight of the rifle pointing at them, the click of the safety, the slow, deliberate motion as the barrel dropped toward the ground. The soldier's face wasn't hateful, not cruel, just tired, just human. And then the tears came. Not tears of fear anymore, tears of relief, tears of confusion, tears of grief for everything they had believed and everything they had lost. Elizabeth Meyer, pregnant with twins, described her experience. When the American said, "You're okay," I didn't believe him at first, but he smiled. Such a young, ordinary smile. That's when I broke down. These were just boys, farm boys and city boys, not monsters. But even as American soldiers showed mercy to German civilians, they were uncovering horrors that tested every ounce of that mercy. The moral complexity was just beginning. The same American soldiers who gave chocolate to German children also liberated concentration camps. This created an impossible moral puzzle. On April 11, 1945, units of the U.S. Third Army entered Buchenwald concentration camp. They found over 21,000 prisoners, barely alive, mountains of corpses, evidence of systematic torture and murder. The smell of death hung so thick that soldiers vomited. Staff Sergeant James Hoyt described what he saw. "I cannot find words. Human beings reduced to skeletons, bodies stacked like firewood. The prisoners who could still walk looked like ghosts. This was not war. This was something else entirely." 3 days later, some of these same soldiers occupied German towns nearby. German civilians claimed they knew nothing about the camps. They said they had no idea what was happening just miles from their homes. American soldiers didn't believe them. How could they not know? The rage was real. Some soldiers wanted revenge. Some took it. There were beatings. There was rough treatment. Military police had to intervene in several incidents where angry GIs confronted German civilians. But military commanders issued clear orders: no collective punishment, no revenge killings, treat civilians according to international law, protect non-combatants, including pregnant women and children. General Dwight Eisenhower enforced these rules strictly. He also did something else. He ordered German civilians to tour the concentration camps. He wanted them to see with their own eyes what had been done in their name. Thousands of German civilians were marched through Buchenwald, Dachau, and other liberated camps. Many cried. Many claimed shock. Some fainted. Whether their surprise was genuine remains debated to this day. American soldier Marcus Orr watched German women walk through Dachau. "Some looked genuinely horrified," he wrote. "Others just looked away. I felt angry watching them. But orders were orders. We were there to bear witness, not to judge." This was the impossible position American soldiers occupied. They saw the worst crimes in human history. Then they returned to German villages and were expected to behave with discipline and humanity. Most did exactly that. The numbers tell the story. Between April and June 1945, US forces liberated over 80 concentration camps and subcamps. They documented approximately 250,000 survivors in various states of starvation and disease. American military doctors and medics worked around the clock to save as many as possible. Yet during this same period, those same American forces managed occupation duties across millions of German civilians without descending into mass revenge. Yes, there were crimes. Military courts prosecuted over 400 cases of serious misconduct by American soldiers against German civilians in 1945 alone. These included assault, theft, and worse. The army didn't hide these crimes. They investigated and punished them. But compared to the scale of occupation, millions of soldiers interacting with millions of civilians, the restraint was remarkable. Private Leonard Linton struggled with this duality. His unit liberated a camp where they found hundreds of dead children. Days later, he helped a pregnant German woman carry water to her home. He wrote to his sister, "I don't understand how I can hate these people for what they allowed to happen and still help them, but I do both. Maybe that's what separates us from them." That separation mattered. American soldiers had every reason for revenge. They had buried their friends killed by German soldiers. They had seen concentration camps. They knew German civilians had supported Hitler's regime. But when a pregnant German woman stumbled into the street, terrified and pleading for her life, most American soldiers lowered their rifles anyway. Not because Germans deserved mercy, but because Americans believed in something larger than revenge. They believed in rules that applied even to enemies. They believed in protecting the helpless, even when the helpless came from a nation that had shown no such mercy. This was America's answer to Nazi ideology, not matching cruelty with cruelty, but demonstrating that humanity could survive even the worst war in history. And the women who wept when rifles lowered understood, perhaps better than anyone, what that meant. The moment an American rifle lowered, more than one woman's life was saved. An entire future changed direction. The women who survived those first encounters told their children. Those children told their children. 3 generations of Germans grew up hearing the same story. We expected monsters, we found human beings. This became the foundation of post-war Germany's relationship with America. Historians debate many aspects of post-1945 Germany, but one fact remains clear. West Germany became America's closest ally in Europe within a decade. The same nation that had fought the bloodiest war in history became partners in rebuilding Europe. This transformation didn't happen because of treaties or politics alone. It happened because of thousands of individual moments. Moments when rifles lowered, when chocolate was shared, when pregnant women were protected instead of killed. Anna Fischer, the pregnant woman who hid in a cellar, named her son Thomas, after the American medic who checked his heartbeat before he was born. Thomas Fischer grew up hearing his mother's story. He became a teacher in Munich. He taught his students about the difference between propaganda and truth. "My mother's generation believed terrible lies," Thomas Fischer said in a 2005 interview. "But when those lies broke, they broke completely. That's why Germany could change, because the truth was so obvious, so undeniable. The contrast between what Germans were told and what actually happened created a credibility gap that destroyed Nazi ideology more effectively than any bomb. If the Americans weren't monsters, what else had been a lie? If Hitler had lied about the enemy, what else had he lied about? The camps? The war? Everything?" German psychologist Maria Hoffmann studied post-war trauma in the 1960s. She interviewed hundreds of women who lived through the final months of the war. Her research found a common pattern. The moment their expectations were proven false, the moment soldiers showed mercy instead of violence, it created what she called cognitive collapse. Everything they believed about the world fell apart at once, Hoffmann wrote. It was traumatic, but it was also liberating. It allowed them to rebuild their understanding of reality on a foundation of truth rather than propaganda. This didn't excuse German guilt. The concentration camps were real. The Holocaust was real. Millions had died because of German actions. American kindness towards civilians didn't erase those crimes, but it did something important. It showed Germans that a different way of living was possible, that nations could be strong without being cruel, that power didn't require brutality. The Marshall Plan rebuilt German cities with American money, but the lowered rifles rebuilt German minds. By 1949, West Germany had adopted a democratic constitution. By 1955, it had joined NATO. By the 1960s, German students were learning honest history about Nazi crimes. The transformation was remarkable, though never complete and never easy. And it started with simple acts of mercy. The American soldiers who lowered their rifles didn't think they were changing history. Most were just following orders. Some were following conscience. Many were simply too tired to hate. But their actions echoed across decades. When German women wept because they weren't killed, they wept for many reasons: relief, shame, confusion, grief for the lies they had believed, grief for the years they had lost to those lies. But perhaps they also wept because they glimpsed something they thought had died in the war. They glimpsed the possibility that humanity could survive the worst humans could do to each other. American soldiers came as conquerors, but they left something more valuable than victory. They left proof that even enemies could choose mercy, that even in war's darkest hours, some lines didn't have to be crossed. In the end, America's greatest weapon wasn't its bombs or tanks. It was the simple choice to see enemies as human beings. The women who expected death and found mercy carried that truth forward. They rebuilt families, raised children, and constructed a new Germany on the ruins of the old one. They never forgot the moment rifles lowered, neither should we, because that moment teaches something essential. Propaganda dies when it meets reality. Fear breaks when it meets kindness, and hatred loses its power when ordinary people choose again and again to act with basic human decency. The pregnant women who sobbed in relief became mothers who taught their children the difference between lies and truth. That choice, to lower the rifle, to offer protection instead of violence, echoed through generations. Some victories are won on battlefields, others are won in quiet moments of unexpected mercy. Both kinds matter. Both shape the world we inherit.